Come on in. Come on in. It's time for Coffee with Scott Adams. Today we're doing the outdoor version. Hard to believe, but sometimes I do venture outdoors. Weather has to be perfect or I don't bother. I think the outdoors is for people who don't have shelter. You know what else is overrated? The outdoors. But today's perfect weather, so I'm out there. All right, so, whoa, we're up to over 700 people quickly. So have all of you seen President Trump's latest quote about that Don Jr. meeting? The president quoted, let's see, looks like it was this morning. What time did he do this? It's 7 a.m. My time, I guess, which must have been 10 a.m. his time. So President Trump's tweet this morning is, and I shall read it to you, most politicians would have gone to a meeting like the one Don Jr. attended in order to get info on an opponent. That's politics! Exclamation mark. All right, let me read it again. So this is this morning, and this is something that the president has said before, but he thought this was worthy of another tweet this morning, and I agree. Most politicians would have gone to a meeting like the one Don Jr. attended in order to get info on an opponent. Do you see what he did there? You probably don't see it, so let me describe it. So the conversation had been, did Don Jr. do the right thing? Now, President Trump is wisely expanding the topic to most politicians would have. And what this requires is that the news is going to have to focus on this question of whether most politicians would have. Now, hold on a second. I always see something on the side of my mouth when I'm doing these things. So here's why this is brilliant. If you saw my Periscope yesterday, you know that the politicians or the political experts are saying one of two things. They're either saying, I would never have gone to that silly meeting. I'm far too wise and clever to have gone to a meeting like that. I would have alerted the authorities right away. But the more you think about it, the more you realize that just game with me the options. So option one is you don't go to the meeting and you turn it over to the FBI or the authorities. And you say, somebody is alleging to be from the Russian government. Go check this out. Now, let's say two possibilities. There's either nothing to the meeting, which is what happened, or there is something to it, and there's some kind of weird Russian government conspiracy thing, and you've turned it over to the government. Now, what have you really done? You've given the government the information it was going to have, whether you had the information or not. So in other words, if you went to the meeting first, and then you got the information, and then you contacted the authorities, you could say, here's the information, these guys this information came from an illicit source, so I'm turning it over to you immediately, after I know what the information is. Right? Now, in what world is the clever politician the one who doesn't get the information first before turning it over to the authorities? Because the authorities have their job, which is to make sure Russia isn't interfering. But your job as a politician, in this hypothetical, is to have as much information as you can to win the election. And you can do all of that by getting the information first, and then, if situation warrants it, then you turn it over to authorities after you have the information. Now, I was joking on yesterday's Periscope that one Ed Rollins, political expert, many years experience, was saying, no, I wouldn't go to that meeting. That would be crazy. I would send a lower level person to go to the meeting for me, which is really the same thing as saying you go to the meeting. So what the president has done is he's created a clever little trap. Because if the news wants to keep talking about this, they kind of have to talk about what his latest pronouncement is, right? They can't really ignore his latest tweet on this. It's almost impossible because his tweets are the news. So now they're going to have to ask the question, would most politicians go to this? And now they've had a few days to think about it, and they know what their follow-up question is. Because the follow-up question is, really? You would have turned this over to the authorities before you knew what the information was that could have potentially been very useful to your campaign, and you could have asked first and then turned it over and everything would be just fine? You know, why would you turn it over and not get the information when you had the option of getting the information and then turning it over? So now that the reporters are a little smarter about how to ask the question, it turns out that it's this wonderful trap. This is very much reminds me of the Steve Jobs play. Do you remember the Steve Jobs play with AntennaGate? I talk about this one all the time because it's such a classic. So when the iPhone 4, I think it was turning itself off when you touched it in a certain way, so Steve Jobs, instead of saying, hey, you know, we made a mistake, which is what people expected him to say, he reframed it and he said, all smartphones have problems. We're trying to fix this. We want to make our customers happy. The moment he said all smartphones have problems, the media needed to talk about that because that was the new news on the topic that they were already talking about. And so they started looking at all smartphones and realized, oh yeah, they all have problems. Yeah, Apple does have this problem. It's just one of many smartphone problems. And what President Trump has done is taken the conversation away from, did Don Jr. handle this, you know, the way Don Jr. should have, to the larger question of how would an experienced politician handle the situation? And once people have thought it through just a little bit, they're going to realize that any politician who hands this over to authorities before finding out the information is the dumb fuck in the room. Right? There's just no way around that. The dumb person is the one who doesn't find out the information and turns it over to the authorities so that nobody will know, nobody will hear about it before the election, and effectively puts the decision in, you know, Comey's hands, right? Because Comey would have been head of the FBI, so he would have been the one to decide whether to release it or not, and that's worked out well. We've all seen what happens when Comey gets to decide whether things are crimes or things should be announced or leaked or whatever else. So it's this wonderful. It's like a slow fuse time bomb that the president has set, because on first blush, if you just say, "Hey, do you think Don Jr. should have taken this meeting?" There'd be a lot of people who say, "Oh no, don't take that meeting. Look at all the bad things that happen. Don't want to be talking with Russian spies." That's your first reaction, right? I think most people probably had that first reaction. But as soon as you think about it a little bit, which is about the time we've had to think about it now, you realize that if you have two choices, one of them is to have the information and then also turn it over to authorities, versus just not having the information and turning it over to authorities. There's no way that those two choices are equal, because we know it was totally legal to get the information. Everybody says so. Like, even the critics are saying, well, yeah, it's legal to hear the information, but then you should have done something about it. Now, did Don Jr. Do the wrong thing? Well, we'll never know, because there was no information, right? Now, if Don Jr. had heard information from the Russian government, and it mattered, and it was really about Hillary Clinton, and it could have had an impact on the election, he absolutely needed to tell the FBI or authorities, whoever you tell about that sort of thing. But that didn't happen. So if you're saying that he made the wrong decision, I would propose that he never got to a point where he needed to make a decision. Because the decision of do you hear the information is an easy one. Yeah, of course, you listen in case it matters. What you do after you hear the information, well, we'll never know because he never really heard any information that was worth telling anybody about. So anyway, that's it looks like an unimportant tweet, which actually is a much bigger deal than it looks on the surface. You think he fell into an obvious setup. Well, I'll tell you what the obvious setup was. The obvious setup was there was a publicist who lied to get him into a meeting about something that his client wanted him to be in the meeting about. So it was obviously a setup, but it wasn't a political setup, not in the sense of the election. It was a setup in the sense that a publicist lied to get something done, which is what publicists do, That's sort of the job of a publicist. If it's so smart, then why did Junior lie about it? The thing is that we don't know if he lied or he didn't think about it, or he didn't think it was important, or he didn't think it was necessary to be in the forum. Because remember that in his world, his point of view is that nothing happened. And that's my point of view too. The people who think it was a big deal and therefore he should have remembered it and remembered all the people in the room and all the things that people don't really remember when you're in an election season and there are millions of meetings and you're meeting dozens and dozens of people every day that you don't remember who are in the room. I can't tell you how many times this happens to me. Somebody will introduce themselves and say, we met at X. Remember we talked at X? And I always look and say, oh, yeah, I remember that, but I don't, because I meet tons of people and I don't remember them all. He released his own emails. He's innocent. Well, releasing your own emails doesn't mean you're innocent. The thing that means you're innocent is that there's no there's no crime apparently alleged. So the people who are saying, why did he lie about it? The simple answer is, it's far more likely, as in 10 to 1, that it just didn't ping his radar as something that was worth mentioning. And then when he did remember it, he didn't remember it accurately. Because again, it wasn't important. It was one of many things he did. Go on the news and talk. So CNN has invited me to be part of a special that they're doing about the president's use of Twitter and how that's changed things. So I know you'll be surprised, but yes, I will be appearing recorded, just one little interview in a larger context. It's a setup. I thought about that. I actually thought, is this a trap? Is CNN going to pay me back for all the fun I've had at their expense lately? They will slaughter you. Didn't you say the same thing with Sam Harris? By the way, you'll see the Sam Harris podcast that I've already recorded sometime at the end of this week, probably. Yes, I did talk to Sam Harris. We had a very long conversation, 2 hours of fun. I won't spoil it for you, but so obviously I haven't listened to it back, but my guess, it's just a guess. My guess is that if you have enjoyed ever listening to Sam Harris, or if you have ever enjoyed listening to me, you're really going to like this 2 hours. So it was a lively conversation. We covered a lot of ground. That's all I'm going to tell you about it. Did a publicist call you about what? Are you sure you want to do this? Well, one of the things you have to understand about my, I guess it's either my mental makeup or my bad risk aversion or something, is that the more controversial it is, the more fun it is. the more likely it is to go wrong, the more fun it is. The more likely I think it's a trap, the more fun it is. So all the things that you're telling me I should run away from are all the reasons I want to do it, because that's what makes it fun. You know what's the funny thing is that being on CNN doesn't sell any books. Yeah, being on CNN, even if you get to mention your book, because I've actually tracked that. You can look at the Amazon sales rankings, and I've done this. I've gone on CNN in past years, promoted my book, and then I go look at what happens to Amazon, and nothing, just no change at all, literally no change. Whereas if I appear on, let's say, Tim Ferriss's podcast, or James Altucher, or one of those podcasts, and I'll watch my Amazon numbers zoom. NPR, same thing. NPR is really good for selling books. But CNN, I don't think CNN has ever sold me a book. I don't know if it's just because they don't have many viewers. Oh, the other thing that's no good is the morning shows. I've done Good Morning America and, whatever the CBS version of that is. They don't sell any books. Charlie Rose, I did Charlie Rose like 15 years ago. I can't remember if that sold any books or not. I don't think it did. What about Tucker? Don't know. I do know. Tucker did not sell any books either. So TV interviews just don't move many books. The Joe Rogan show, that might actually move books, I would think. Yeah, the podcasts, for whatever reasons, are just much better. So people were warning me or asking me not to go on InfoWars because people would say, don't go on InfoWars, they have a bad reputation, for fake news, and you're gonna associate yourself with that, and that'll be bad for you. To which I say, all the more reason to go on there. So here's a little mind F job that I like to give people. You ready for this one? You like it when I screw with your heads, right? This is a reframing that will just make your head shake, because you'll know that it's true. All right, let's say you're a person on the left, and what you want is a world where things on the left rule and the people on the right don't get what they want. So that's your perfect world, that you're on the left and you want people to be more like you. And then you get a President Trump. Well, is that good for you or is that bad for you? Because President Trump represents, the more the right, and you're on the left. So is that good for you or bad for you for your interests? Well, let's think about it. If somebody on your side, let's say Hillary Clinton got elected, would that change anybody's mind on the left? In other words, would they be more likely to be left-leaning because they had a President Clinton? And I would say no, nothing would change, right? Now, would the people on the right move toward the center if we had a President Clinton? No. In fact, their opposition would harden. So if somebody on the left got the president they wanted, nothing would change in terms of the attitudes of the country, in terms of policy. Now let's say that President Trump gets elected. Oh, he did. And let's say that he's not as far right as you thought he was, and I've been telling you for 2 years he wouldn't be. And that once president, he would start moving toward the middle. Hey, look, he doesn't want to waterboard terrorists. Hey, look, he doesn't want to go after their families. Hey, look, he doesn't want to deport 10 million people who have been minding their own business in this country for years and years and years. Hey, look, he came into office friendly to gay marriage. And hey, look, he wants to send things to the states instead of having the big old government do bad things. So in other words, he moved the right toward the center. Hey, guess what? He wants to cover more people, not fewer, with health care. All right. So if you're on the left, Trump moved people toward your position in a way that no one else could have. In other words, the country became more what you wanted because the guy you didn't want to get elected got elected. And who knew that that was going to happen? I did. Predicted a year ago. Yeah. So, and think about it. All of the things that the Democrats want, we're in a strange time because they got what they wanted. You know, they have, you know, basically on social programs and stuff, they already have what they wanted. So the things that they want that are harder to get are, you know, budget related because they're trade-offs and stuff. Be smug. How will President Trump be remembered post-presidency? Far too early to know, but I'm guessing positively. Smug it up. So was this your end game the whole time? Maybe. Just reading your comments here, taking a pause. So, what was I heard? Yeah, it was Rand Paul. So I heard Rand Paul talking about how the new healthcare bill doesn't give him what he wants because there's not enough freedom built into it. All right, so here's your situation. You've got a few Republicans who say, I'm not going to support the bill because it's just a little too spendy, not enough freedom of choice built into it. And you hear the people who don't agree with him saying, yeah, but, you know, this freedom of choice thing, great concept, but it would take a long time for the freedom to work through the system to get us what we want. And in the meantime, people don't have health insurance. We can't get this thing passed. So Rand Paul has this, what I would consider the superior philosophical economic position. But he doesn't have a practical way to get there. Luckily, I'm here to solve this for him. For those few people who stayed on this Periscope long enough to hear this part. What is it that Rand Paul needs to turn his impractical but superior philosophy into policy? Would you like me to solve it? I'm going to tell you the same fucking thing I tell you on every topic, which is always the solution. It's a better system. What's the better system? You find some states or some locations to test the Rand Paul approach. And you say, okay, this Rand Paul thing does sound attractive, but we can't do it sort of to the whole country all at once. It's too big of a risk. So if there's a small country or county or state or something, it's got to be smaller than a country, who wants to test this, yeah, New Hampshire perhaps, let's test it and call it a test. We'll give it 3 years or whatever it is. And at the end, we'll know if this works for everybody, and then we'll do more of it, or we won't, but we will have tested it. So here's the problem that all government does that business never does. Business never makes this problem. Business says, let's try this small and test it, see how it works. If it works, we'll do more of it. What does government say? Let's change everything for 100 years without testing it first, right? So Rand Paul can get everything he wants by agreeing to the bill the way it is, as ugly and terrible as it is, just to get it passed, if he also gets a test of his way of doing things, which is less regulation, less restriction, more free markets. Find any place in the country that's willing to test this, and I'm sure you can find it. There must be some super Republican district, or I've suggested Silicon Valley is the right place to do it. Or you could even run it in parallel. So, for example, you could have a county in which people can subscribe to the regular healthcare system they've always had, plus whatever gets passed. But optionally, they could also have what I'd call the Rand Paul opt-in, where you opt in to have fewer government restrictions just on you and these people in this test for a certain amount of time, and you just run it in parallel. But you have to opt in to take the extra risk. Is there anybody here who can give me any reason that this isn't A, the smart thing to do, and B, the only fucking way to get past where we are? Am I wrong about this? Can anybody come up with even the smallest disagreement with what I just said? You can't, can you? Because feelings. Hospital ships are unregulated. Thank you very much. You know the idea that Peter Thiel had for a while there? I think he's backed off of it for practical reasons, but the idea of a barge, off the coast in international waters where you could have, let's say, you could have international doctors who work cheap. You could fly people out there and have their operations and fly them back. Yeah, let's try some of that stuff. Why not? You know what would do, and again, everybody asked me what would turn me against President Trump, and certainly if what comes out of this is just some new big government-looking healthcare thing that doesn't solve anything in the long run, and there's nothing new about it, nobody's testing anything, nobody's saying here's the future, nobody's pushing technology, nobody's planning to reduce costs in the future. If there's none of that as part of whatever we do in healthcare, then I would personally call that a failure. Death tax for what? To pay for healthcare? It wouldn't be the worst idea. I wouldn't like it, but it wouldn't be the worst idea. There are enough existing systems. There are existing systems, but they're in different places and cultures. And you can't really just take somebody's existing system and graft it over here. What you can do is take the good parts of existing systems and add a few good parts that you think are worth testing and try it somewhere. You could certainly do that. And I certainly think we should try the digital doctor thing. Maybe you have your expensive stuff. Oh, here was the issue. Let me test this idea out. I was thinking about this when Rand Paul was talking about the issue of pre-existing conditions, which I'm going to confess ahead of time I don't understand the whole issue, but I'll tell you what I think I understand. If you allow people to sign up for insurance with pre-existing conditions that are the expensive kind, then they can have the option of not buying insurance until they need it. Then they buy it a day before they need it, and the health insurance company just gets wrecked because they didn't get any, insurance payments, but they had to pay a lot of money. So he's saying that's bad for free markets, and I understand the point. But you also don't want people with bad health problems not to have coverage. So you have two impossible things. One is impossible in terms of the incentives it creates, which would destroy the system. And the other is impossible because people with big problems wouldn't have health care. Two impossible systems. So what about this? And maybe somebody's proposed this. I'll just toss this out as the bad version of the idea, and maybe you can fix it. Suppose the government said anybody can sign up anytime for any kind of insurance. But if they sign up for something and then spend over a certain dollar amount in the first year, or the first 3 months, whatever it is, over a certain dollar amount. And let's say the dollar amount is $5,000. It might need to be lower, but let's say it's $5,000. That the government will pay instead of the insurance company anything in the first year that's over $5,000. That way the insurance could be handling the big, expensive stuff. It would take away this incentive to not pay health insurance until you needed the big stuff. Or would it? I suppose you'd still not pay because then you could get the big stuff just by signing up. Yeah, this sounds like that wouldn't work, huh? A digital solution for childcare? Yes, in a sense. I would bet that every neighborhood has people who have plenty of free time. They're retired, and they could do a day of watching your kids, and they wouldn't even mind. They'd like having the company. So yeah, the digital solution is an app that would allow you to find neighbors and friends who had been, vetted by social networks to be safe enough to keep your kids with them. Do you think we'll end up with single payer? That's a hard one. I can only go as far as maybe on that. I don't have a prediction on that. Yeah, that exists for pets, exactly. Did I make $1 million from the show? What show are you talking about? I think the secret is that there has to be first-class health care for people with money, and there needs to be a lower-cost version that might have a little bit extra risk for people who don't have money. But making it all the same health care for everybody, I think, is a losing proposition. Why shouldn't healthcare costs naturally go down like all other tech? Partly because of the insurance situation. If insurance is paying for things, then customers don't shop for it the way they could or should. Part of it is because healthcare is creating new procedures that we didn't have before. So, the new stuff has to be paid for. But I will tell you that let me tell you a system that could probably solve healthcare for you. Let's see if I'm going to draw a picture in your mind of a chart that would fix the healthcare problem. Are you ready for this? So I'm mentally going to draw a chart for you in your head. So imagine this. It starts with a list from top to bottom of what costs the most in healthcare, excluding the insurance part. So here I'm assuming that if you take the cost of healthcare itself down, that the cost of insuring it would go down because it's related. So imagine from top to bottom, what is the most expensive stuff down to the least expensive stuff. Then, coming off of each part of the list, there's a little multi-line thing that points to the companies that are working right now on solutions to lower those costs dramatically. So you've got from top to bottom the list of what costs the most in healthcare. So it might be hospital stay, magnetic imaging, whatever it is, from operations, from most to least. And then you identify which companies are working on lowering the costs in those top areas, and then you shine a light on it and say, look, all these companies need attention. They might need funding. They might need people to test their products. They might need people to just know they exist. They might need the government to waive some regulations that are in the way. They might need to be fast-tracked. Attention gets you a lot of things. They might need better executives. They might need somebody to, be a test customer. They might need a hospital to say, hey, we'll take a few of those and get you going, something to prime the pump. So in other words, information could probably solve healthcare costs. You would need that chart. I'll say it again. It's just a list from top to bottom of the categories of healthcare that cost the most, with the expensive ones at the top. And then for each of those categories, the little lines coming off it with the various startups and companies that are working to drastically lower those costs, because each of them have something like that. And then you just shine a light on those companies and let people send energy that way, whether it's investments, better thinking, that sort of thing. And there is your solution to healthcare for the world. All right, that's enough for now. Got to run. Remember, never win small when you can win bigly.